Hi there, friends. Welcome to another edition of my content UX audits that I do live here on LinkedIn, Twitter now, X, Facebook, and YouTube. Today I am wearing a shirt that I got at Black Hat because we are going to be doing an audit for a cybersecurity topic slash blog. Um, so I thought that would be kind of fun because mostly I talk about B2B tech and WordPress and things like that. And so this is a little bit different, some different context to look at. And as a reminder, and I guess one thing I should probably do is make sure that this is actually streaming. I believe it is, but we're just going to make doubly sure. And yes, it does in fact look like it's working, so that's great. As a reminder, you can submit content to audit, whether it is yours or just a brand that you want to see me go through on screen using this URL at the bottom here, which is Blogsmith, no vowels, .tips/content UX. And then also check out my YouTube, which if you look up Content Marketing Mentor, the Blogsmith, you'll find it. And you can see some past renditions of these content UX audits. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to say before getting into today's audit. It's going to kind of speak for itself. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm just going to switch to the camera in camera view, which I recently discovered how to use on Ecamm Live, which is what I'm using to stream. And then it connects with Restream. So that is the back end tech setup if you're curious. So anyway, today, our featured brand for this content UX audit is Snyk. And I guess the connection to like this shirt, because it's not the brand on this shirt, is that they have been a past sponsor of Black Hat. Okay. So what I'll say, now and really with like any of these content UX audits is I typically pick brands and blogs that I have a lot of respect for. I think that they're doing an incredible job, and I'm just adding like another perspective here. That's what we're doing here. We're kind of just like analyzing the approach here and adding in some extra thoughts. So anyway, the first thing you'll notice is that this was actually from October 2023. So it's a little bit dated, but there is a reason why I picked this article. It's because it was listed, let's see if I can find it really quick, on their blog. And as you can see, once we get to this page, it's something that shows up in the hero image, and I swear my browser is just like super slow. I think there's some sort of like Chrome extension that's like majorly slowing things down, so I apologize as I jump between things. Hopefully it won't affect things too much. But anyway, as you can see here, it's located under their editor's pick. So even, if it was like a year ago that this content was published, it's still relevant enough to them that they are sharing it above the fold on their, blog resource center. There are more up-to-date pieces of content too. But I think this is like a good opportunity to consider like whatever you do put on your editor's picks. And I don't know what my husband is doing, but it sounds like he's hammering something. I did tell him I was doing this at 1, so I apologize if there's any like random noises happening. We're in the middle of a bunch of different house projects, so I'll yell at him if I have to in a couple minutes. In fact, I'm probably just gonna send a text really quick to let him know and remind him that we're doing this. As I do that, because women are great multitaskers, I'm going to describe what I was trying to describe earlier, which is when you have a section like this, and you have a ton of blog content, I think it's important to be constantly evaluating, like what is there? Like, does it make sense to have something that is a little more timely just in terms of when it was published? Or is this like one of your top performing blog articles? So I don't have that context, so I can't speak to that. It's just something to say because this is really prime real estate. And it is worth noting that when I looked through these other articles here in their like blog resource center, that they were all from late 2023 or early 2024. So again, that could be because these are like really the ones that they want to focus on right now. But just a reminder for all of us, when you sort of like pin things, whether it's to a social profile or, to like the top of your blog, have a plan for like constantly deciding when you're going to update that. Okay. So this article. It's a really great article. I enjoyed reading it, for the record. And the comments that I have are similar to things that I've said before on these live streams. So the first thing that comes to mind is they have this breadcrumb at the top, this like Snyk blog link back, and it kind of feels out of place, I guess, because what I tend to expect when I see breadcrumbs is like, kind of like the link to go back to where you were, but I would also expect to see like where I'm at. And like we have the title, right? But I'm talking more about breadcrumbs in terms of clickable links, and specifically in this case, maybe like a category, I think is what I'm thinking. So the category could even be like, the featured blogs or something like that, or like a specific focus, a specific sub-focus of their blog. So my recommendation would be either to get rid of the breadcrumb or like add on to it, add usefulness to it. Otherwise, I'm not sure that it's super helpful here. And again, this is something where like testing metrics would be interesting to see if people actually click that and if it then leads to further engagement. The next thing that I noticed was the featured image. And so if we go back to where we just were, so you see this like blue shield, right? And now, of course, my computer's going to take forever to load because I did that. So it's like the same, it's very similar to like this featured image that shows up here. I just feel like this one that we see like in these editors picks, and then when we scroll down and see the rest of the blog, they're really more distinctive of the brand. Like they're using the brand colors. They're not like super, how do I say this? They're not super associated with the brand. Like there's still some, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like you could associate with these with different brands, right? But then like the purple kind of brings it back to Snyk. Whereas this article, it's not really distinctive of Snyk to have, it has a shield, which you can see in the logo. But other than that, that's a fairly common sort of like imagery, visual, I guess, reference that's used in cybersecurity. So anyway, my comment here is that it's not really distinctive of the brand, even when compared to other like sort of non-distinctive images. And the other thing about this featured image, it's interesting because it's sharing it like in the sidebar, so it's not part of like the main content. And I don't know if I like that or not. I think it's interesting, so I'm calling attention to it. But I think like the problem ultimately here is it's really small, so it's going to be hard to see details, especially on mobile. And like if there was ever a case where they used text on the image, which doesn't seem like it is based on like their other blog content, that would be really difficult to read here on my large like desktop monitor, but also certainly on a cell phone. So just something to consider. I think that header images or hero images, whatever you want to call them, I think that they can be a great tool to like compel people, whether that's like on social and it's like the generated preview, or when people land on the page, it's something that if they didn't see it before, it might compel them to read further. So I think it's important. Again, something to test, I think, just different positions, but also like maybe doing more to incorporate Snyk branding so that it's more distinctive of them. Okay, so the next thing that I was looking at is this little sidebar CTA, and what I noticed when looking through a couple of other blog posts is that they're all fairly customized. The ones that I looked at, they might recycle some over similar topics. But they all kind of like expand on the given topic in a way, which I think is really cool. And it's such a great way to like bring a brand like Snyk back into the equation. I think, and I've said this before, but I feel like so many brands create content and the purpose, it has a business purpose for it, but they're kind of like afraid to overly talk about their brand because it like in fears that it's like a turnoff or something. Even though it's like, well, the brand paid for the content, like I think they have a right to be a part of that conversation. Of course, it's all about how you go about it and, being thoughtful and strategic and how you weave your brand back in. But anyway, I'm just calling this out as a really great way to do that. One thing I will say is it throws me off slightly to see that we have title case here, and then we have sentence case here and the sidebar, which is fine because they're different elements. But if I click there to see where it takes me, again, I see title case here, but then I see a mix of title and sentence case in the CTA. So there's some inconsistencies both between the title itself and the title of the CTA, but also between different articles. And so that's just something, I harp on this all the time, but it's these like small visual and like formatting inconsistencies that can kind of lead to, in my opinion, like a subconscious questioning or like the beginnings of maybe mistrust. That's probably being a little bit extreme, but it all adds up, right? And I think when it comes to branding, it's about being consistent, and that's how you develop a brand. It's about consistently formatting things, consistent approach to things, it's consistent voice. So it's just part of like the grand scheme of things. Okay, so the next thing is that this is written, and we have the name of the author, and looking on LinkedIn, I believe this person is a product manager. I could be confusing that with product marketer. In my mind, they're very similar because they're both trying to make a product work, and it's just different ways to go about doing that. But either way, somebody very involved in the product side of things, somebody who is the subject matter expert. But I feel like what's missing here in the content sort of like template itself is there's no author bio. And this is something that I harp on all the time too, especially lately, because I feel like what we're learning from these various Google algorithm updates, especially those that have to do with helpful content, but maybe also having to do with like their spam updates where they create policies and approaches specifically in terms of things like thin content, which I'm not saying that's what this is. But I think that like the idea moving forward to kind of stay compliant with this like Google helpful content guidelines and trying to rank high in relevant search is having an author bio that positions the author as somebody who is an expert in this topic. So that's a missed opportunity here because this person is uniquely expert in this topic as a product manager. I always want to say like project manager. Anyway, so, and then, you know, I think it's always good. You should always have a publish date. It might feel a little bit counterintuitive for some things that are more evergreen in nature, but Google still kind of like needs that content, or at least want context, or at least wants it so that they understand like how fresh your content is. Hi, Lisa. Lisa says agreed, need an author bio for sure. Okay, so, and then also I think it's always nice to set expectations for how long it's going to take to read something, just so that like you can decide if you want to consume it now or later. And I don't know, maybe devil's advocate is like, if it seems like it's long, maybe it'll never get read. But I feel like people appreciate context in general. We're all trying to like set expectations with how we format our content to help people find the answer to like the ultimate question that led them to open it, whether it's from search or otherwise. So the more you can do to like get ahead of those types of things, the better. Okay, so my next thing that I wanted to talk about, a lot of this just has to do with like formatting and consistencies and things like that. I wanted to talk about how this author quoted, a previous study by the University of California. And then later in the article, we hear about some other studies. And in this case, we're given dates as sort of like the context for these studies. I find that to be a best practice. And I would say that we should probably see the date up here too, because this particular stat is one that like I know I've quoted in an article before. I think I've probably like for one of my earliest freelance clients have quoted this exact stat because I used to work on like different productivity topics. I wanted to share some guidance from the Blogsmith's content style guide about stats specifically to help you be consistent in how you format them, and also to create those expectations that I think are so important to set for people. So, for example, our guidance is when quoting a study, lead with the name of the study, with a link using the study or the organization's name as the only link anchor text. So like something like Chase Bank would be the link anchor text, or like a 2019 Chase Bank study, for example. The year of the study, then share the resulting stat. It helps people understand the credibility about what they're about to read and benchmark it in time. So hopefully that's useful to you. Are there any other ones that I wanted to say? Oh, this guidance is relevant here as well. Just the idea of, it depends on what industry you're in, but certain stats I think become outdated at a certain point, and this is especially true in like the digital marketing world. I mean, it's like, going back to old articles and reading about how we wrote about Google Analytics, and it's like, it's not Google Analytics anymore, it's GA4. So it's like things that you almost take for granted. Like, I don't know if anybody could have anticipated that like Google Analytics would basically rebrand and also like totally redo their tool, but stuff happens. And so depending on the industry, the focus, it may be relevant to you to kind of like create an upper limit for how old your stats should be. So again, you can reference the Blogsmith style guide for some examples if you want to create any guidelines around that. The other thing I wanted to say about this stat is that it is one that is highly referenced. I already mentioned that, like, I feel like I have quoted this stat before. It just feels that familiar to me. And there are certain stats like that where it's like, it almost becomes tired, right? Like maybe there's a better, like a different way to make this point. To say that if basically what it's trying to, the point that it's trying to make is that if you are taken out of your work focus, if you're distracted, or if you like start doing something else, then it creates a problem of flow and it's hard to get back into. And essentially that it takes 23 minutes to get back in flow after that happens. Maybe there's another way to make that point that doesn't feel so similar to other productivity articles that I've read. And again, I have looked back at articles that are not that old and seen some examples of these stats where I'm just like, I feel like there's a better way to say that. But sometimes, it kind of gets lost in translation. And it really depends on like the writer or the brand's familiarity with these stats. So one thing I did want to call out, a personal, what's the word? A personal failure of mine, we can say, is there's this one stat that I shared in one of my articles, like it was a couple years ago, and a blogger called me out about it. So the stat was, I'm going to use this Visme blog because I think this is like a great article in general. It's about various, so it's like myth busting different stats, specifically about visuals, things that tend to be shared either online or in person that we kind of take for granted. And it's like tracing back the sorts. And I would love to make an article like this for the Blogsmith with all the stats that I think are either tired or maybe like misquoted or whatever it is. But anyway, let's go down to the stat itself and I'll explain what I did wrong. Okay, no, that's not that one. Did I pass it? No, here it is. People process images 60,000 times faster than text. I mean, it seems like kind of a wild claim. And it is, because essentially if you like read the context here, this stat can be traced back to a 3M brochure, and the person who created the brochure has not substantiated the claim after being like followed up with about it. Or maybe he wasn't the person who created it, but he's somebody who has like worked with IBM and like spread the stat. Here it is. Yeah. Computer Picture Corporation's then president. So I don't know if he's related to IBM or not. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is that this stat the claim has been made, and then it's been perpetuated over all this content, including content that I've created. So it's a very easy trap to fall into. You get to a point where you see the stat so many times that you just accept it, right? Even if it does feel like tired or however you want to call it, because you've just seen it so many times. But it's like, it might also be incorrect, or you might be like misunderstanding the point or putting it in the wrong context. Like whatever IBM was trying to say in their brochure, maybe not relevant in the use case that we're trying to like pigeonhole it in. So anyway, I just wanted to share that because I feel like we all fall into these traps, and so I'm willing to share like how much I've fallen into this trap in the past. And then, so this article says that blogger Alan Levine made it his mission to discover the truth and basically to like let everybody who used that stat know that it was wrong. I can't remember if it was Alan who got in touch with me. I know it was like a professor type, and he took the time to explain like exactly why it was wrong. Anyway, Alan Levine, I think it's funny. This is the link from that article to his blog, and he has a whole section about 60,000 times. So basically that stat applied to different situations. So he's kind of made like a name for himself over debunking this stat, and like props for that. Okay. So that's all I have to say about like the stats and stuff is just like maybe internally it makes sense to create your own like database of like tired stats that you never wanted to see. That's probably the easiest way. Like as you edit, identify them, put them there, reference it. That's probably the easiest way to handle it so that it doesn't become like a recurring issue that you have to keep editing. Okay, so the next thing I was going to say is I think Snyk does a really great job of incorporating like various calls to action, relevant calls to action, and different ways that their brand relates to the topic at hand. So this is a call to action to download our security companion for AI coding